it's out of compassion for ourselves in a way that we think, okay, what would it be not to just have this habitual relationship to anger, like it's the only source of strength? Can I actually explore the domains of love and compassion as a source of strength? And then we're inspired to do that, to make that exploration.
Hey everyone, I'm Raghu, and I am back with Sharon Salzberg and Robert Thurman, two of my favorite people in the entire universe. And this is special, I got to tell you both. Welcome, first of all. Welcome.
Well, thank you. So nice to be here. So happy
Thank you so much.
Here.
So this is an interesting moment. Actually, this is kind of weird, but yesterday, I don't know how it happened, but I did a podcast with Roshi Joan Halifax.
Oh.
And of course, we could not, and we will not be able to not mention Maui and what has gone on there that happened in such proximity to us and our lengthy times there with Ram Dass and so on.
Yes.
So we did talk about that, and the extremity of what has gone on there is just extraordinary, and it brings to mind how dear Maui was to Ram Dass, right? I mean, not just the land and the healing quality of the land, but the people, and how he was so close to the people. So just a shout
Lahaina
out.
Near where he was?
Yeah, where you were too when you came. It was
I see. I didn't
maybe 10, 12-minute car ride further west, I believe, from Lahaina. Yeah.
Oh,
you mean the resort where the teaching happened, or where he lived?
No, where the teaching happened, the Napili.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
He lived on the northern side, right?
West Maui, actually,
West,
is where it all is. But that facility did not experience a fire. It was, but at the same time, of course, they're doing what they can to host people and so on.
Of course, they're working on it now.
Terrible. So
well, I mean, the social media outlets are full of dire predictions about, how many bodies are going to be discovered. And, I don't think we've really gotten to the depth of this yet.
No.
Definitely not.
No, it's going to take a while.
1,000 more people to be found.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's really terrible.
Yeah.
So terrible.
We send out prayers and thoughts to everyone there. We have, of course, people who, Ram Dass's house is there now on the other side of the island, so of course not affected. But everyone, and we have people there that work with Love Serve Remember Foundation that are on the island, and everyone there, even if they were like an hour and a half away, are experiencing the trauma. I mean, for sure. I mean, I have it going on as well, because it's just indelible memories of being there and being in Lahaina, and it's just it's an extraordinary thing. And so Roshi and I talked about the wonderful times we spent with Ram Dass in those days. Now it's almost 4 years since he left, and talk about written in our minds some of the most wonderful experiences with him back in that day. I think you both remember. Yeah. Sharon and I were talking, and I didn't know that you guys were going to republish this book, Love Your Enemies, How to Break the Anger Habit and Be a Whole Lot Happier, right? What led you to do that, you guys, to republish it? And, and there's a couple of new prefaces and so on.
Well, it was really the invitation of the publisher because it's the 10th anniversary. They said, why don't we reissue it, and you each can write a new preface. And so it was born in their minds. And it's nice to note an anniversary, because in some ways, think about these last 10 years and the concept of enemies.
Yes.
And how much enmity there really is, even more than there was then.
Polarization is extraordinary.
Yes, that's very good to remind me, because Mr. Putin and the Russians are my enemy nowadays. And so I have to love them. In spite of the absolute atrocities they are wreaking on the people of Ukraine and their own people, we have to realize, on the Russian people.
Yeah, and repercussions worldwide.
Own people.
And repercussions worldwide.
Worldwide. I can never forget Yuval Harari. He gave a little talk right on February 25th at the very beginning of the invasion about how seeds of bitterness for generations will be planted. And he really, he was very beautifully and prophetically spoke. I was really moved.
Really?
And of course, he's been absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And so at that time, we have to love them anyway. And in a way, Buddhist thing would be that the evildoers in a situation like that are having the worst situation because of the karma that they are wreaking upon themselves, that will catch up with them, whatever. That not necessarily by the Ukrainians, but in future lives, And that vision of life, that life is a multi-life continuity of people, they're really making a bad situation for themselves. So they really do deserve compassion and love, actually.
Yeah.
Only they could be persuaded to stop,
Yeah. So interesting. Here's an interesting little quote from, we're doing a course, an online course from Ram Dass Love Server member Alan Watts and Ram Dass around basically the Dharma of Alan Watts and Ram Dass, with themes for each week and so on and so forth. So I've been going through the material, and everyone's like, yeah, Alan Watts, we know Alan Watts. And what I found out, I didn't know Alan Watts that well. I was much younger when his books appeared and all of that. But as I'm going through the material, and this is kind of apropos for the re-release of the republication of the book, he said, the real reason for loving one's enemies is that you need them.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
You want to dissect that statement? I mean, I think there's some truth in terms of it provoking the kinds of things you're talking about in this book around anger and so on, and so hatred and so on, that allows us to actually even think of doing the work to transform ourselves. What do you think?
Well, I wonder if even before that, not to take over your role.
No, Raghu, go ahead. You can take it.
Because the structure of the book is based on this Tibetan Buddhist model of 4 kinds of enemies. I wonder if Bob, as the scholar, could actually just, briefly talk about each of the 4, so that when you say enemies, or I say enemies, it has kind of a larger perspective.
Okay, good idea.
Well, I hope I can remember all 4.
Raghu has the book in front of him.
Well, I remember the outer enemy. That's the obvious one. At the moment, it's the insurrectionists in America and the wannabe fascists that are running around with their AR-15s and their bloviating like mass rallies and so on. And this outer enemy, and of course the various fascist dictators around the planet. And the inner enemy is one's own hatred and anger that rises up about that. And then the secret enemy is how different from the inner enemy. I'm really not remembering quite how we defined it in that time. I confess I didn't reread the whole book for this new issue.
Oh, sure.
But the secret enemy could be the idea that there's nothing we can do about ourselves. And we just sort of think we just have to react, and we have to, if we have an impulse to be angry, we just have to follow it. And our body and mind become the tool of the emotion. And because we believe our inner monologue, when it tells us, I hate that, I have to get that person, I have to do that, that could be the secret one, our sense that we can't control it. And then the fourth one, I'm stumped. Sharon, can you remember?
Yes. Well, I think you had defined it as a kind of self-hatred. I mean, sometimes it's
self-loathing.
Self-loathing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Funnily, the Tibetans don't make a thing about that. Remember, you noticed that?
Yeah.
Because I think the Tibetan family system, like many indigenous people's system, they grew up with a decent mom situation. They're not all shattered and squeezed by industrialization like the nuclear family in a modern so-called country, and therefore they don't really. It's more rare that they load themselves in a way. They do. Although they do have, there is one thing which I'm trying to remember in Buddhism. It's called the four currents, mental currents, and one of them is the longing for death. It's sort of a wish to be negated. It's sort of the root of this kind of people who seek things like heroin and numbing themselves, and then even don't mind finally numbing themselves if they have a view that they could become nothing. So there is a kind of self-obliteration, death wish that human beings can develop, surprisingly to us who mainly think about the survival instinct. There's a kind of instinct to obliterate yourself when you're in fear or in pain and things like that. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's connecting to the self-loathing thing. Okay, so the fourth super secret enemy then is the self-destructive energy, let's say. So I hope so. I apologize. I'll have to revisit the podcast and exactly. But on the other hand, one thing we have to remember is Buddhist teaching is never dogmatic. And it's not like then, okay, the four, so you're fine. It's how you define it yourself from your own experience. So Buddhist teaching is all plain coaching. It's not like giving answers. Exactly. It's just giving directions that then people find out with their own experience. So that's our excuse for forgetting.
Yeah. Well, there's Sharon in your preface. I think this is very useful. I'm going to remind you a little bit what you said.
Okay.
But it's really defining love. We're saying love our enemies, right? And you define it. And if love to us means giving in, it makes no sense. If it means spiritual bypassing, denial of pain, or a forced forgiveness, it makes no sense. If we see it as being complicit or subservient, then I think it's not a great idea. But right. Love or loving kindness can mean something more empowering. This exploration invites us to consider what a deeper sense of loving kindness is and why it might be helpful. So I think that has to be part and parcel with everything we speak to here. And I would speak to it in a little bit different, just add the word unconditionality. There's an unconditionality. There's not a purpose for loving. There's not a motive. And that's got to be part of this, because otherwise it's really difficult. You just mentioned, a large part of the population here, or a good part, large may be too big a word, who support this kind of idea of separation and individualism. And it's becoming very, very difficult and sometimes violent in this country. So for me to just say, well, we're going to love these people, we're going to love their leader, is far-fetched unless you really define what we mean about that. So Sharon, maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
I mean, I think that's one way for sure of doing it, of coming to a place where it makes any sense at all to think about love. Of course, even prior to what I'm about to say, and even prior, I think, to what you were saying, is the examination of what love means to us. Because for some people, it really is a medium of exchange. And if you're not getting back, you're not giving, or you're not loving yourself if you're not perfect, or, there's so many meanings that are possible. But I don't actually come to that place so much by thinking unconditional, though I know what you mean. And it's, it needs to be
maybe overreaching, right? A little bit.
Yeah, but for me, and this, especially has to do with the first kind of enemy, like an actual being that we feel enmity towards or we're afraid of, who's hurt us, or we've witnessed hurting others. And there's real damage there, like you never want to get to a place of saying doesn't matter, because it does matter. Actions are consequential. But I think you could have a different kind of motive. It's not the motive I think you were referring to, really. I mean, you could have a motive of what I don't call greed, I call science. And I remember when this book first came out, Bob and I were doing a talk, and someone said something to Bob like, I have a really bad boss. They're very difficult. They're really obnoxious. Why in the world would I want to be practicing this toward them? And Bob would say, well, if you want them to be happy, which is part of that energy of love, if they were happy, they'd be less of a jerk. That's a motive, but it's actually real. And people have come to me all the time and say, I have bad motives. I can't practice. I'm so impure. I want more harmony in my life. And I say, no, that's science. That's like how things work. And so sometimes we just tune into how things work, and that gives us a motive or an impetus to practice. If it becomes like a cudgel, and we're beating ourselves up, like I'm not forgiving enough, that's a different story. The other thing, this book I thought in the beginning was going to be remarkable for how many different titles it went through before it was actually published. And my favorite was the title just before this one, where Bob had, I think, seen a movie, and there was a church in the movie, and in front of the church, like as many churches, there's like a little bulletin board with a pithy saying, and what it said in the board was, love your enemies, it will drive them crazy.
It will drive them crazy.
And I love that, because it took it away from the kind of pious, I'm holier than thou, and we're going to love everyone not knowing what it means. Right. Was that, Bob?
I begged the editors to put that subtitle back on the thing, but they wouldn't do it. But I begged them to do it because it's so humorous. I freaked out. I was chickened out. I thought it might annoy the Christians, that love them, because it will drive them crazy. But that's the idea, what the thing that Ram Dass and Watts said, that going back to that, what you brought up.
Just Watts, Ram Dass didn't say that, just to get clear.
It's really very deep, of course, and it reminded me, there's an incident in the Vimalakirti Sutra where one Mahakashyapa, who is the head monk in the Buddha's community, who happens to be in the dialogue between Vimalakirti and Manjushri, and he heard this teaching of what's called the inconceivable liberation of the bodhisattva. And then he said, oh, it's so great, you bodhisattvas are so lucky. If only we were able, he was a saint, an enlightened person of a certain type. And he said, if only we were able to really get into it, it would be great. I mean, you guys should be really happy. So the Vimalakirti said, and then you shouldn't even be afraid of the devil, he said. As if he was, so that he contrasting himself to the devil, So then Vimalakirti said, oh, don't worry, Mahakashyapa, it's just as great for you. We're all going to the same place. We're all the same. And by the way, the devil is actually a bodhisattva in the inconceivable liberation, because it takes a bodhisattva to harass another bodhisattva, to get that bodhisattva to show their patience and develop their armor of patience and all that. And then he has this one of the things, it's just as a donkey could never attack an elephant, therefore a non-bodhisattva could never do harsh things to a bodhisattva, like demand to have their eyeballs or demand their life or their head, and to give the bodhisattva a chance to give their body, like a Christ-like sort of thing. And so don't worry, Mahakashyapa, goodness is everywhere in the universe. And that reminded me of that. And then it also reminded me of Taratuku once was at breakfast with me. We were talking about a section in Shantideva that talks about the value of the enemy to help you develop patience. And he said, if right now he'd seen on TV Ed McMahon showing up with $1 million prize, for the lotteries, that you get, the publisher's clearinghouse.
Yeah.
And he said, well, everybody would be happy if right now came to the front door, this in Amherst, somebody saying you got $1 million. Now, we were poor professor family, 4 children, always credit card debt. And it says, but you'd be, if you knew understood Shantideva, you would not be that happy to see that. you'd be much happier to see your worst enemy at the door because he really helped you become a bigger being by being more patient. Right. And I just suddenly realized how far I was from realizing the meaning of Shantideva's teaching. Because believe me, I needed Ed McMahon and that thing. I really did. I didn't need so many enemies showing up there. And he was, I get it.
So funny.
I get it. He's right, though.
That's so great.
So, I heard that kind of.
Very deep. Watson and Ram Dass were very deep on that point, for sure.
Yeah.
I heard, the Dalai Lama had posed that question, and I was then in Los Angeles. There's nothing to do with Los Angeles, but that's where I was. And I asked this group of people, which would you rather have? $1 million check or your worst enemy pointing out your flaws? And to a person, they said the $1 million check. And they were very funny. They said, I already know my flaws. Or if I had $1 million, I'd have time to work on my flaws.
Yeah, right.
Which I thought was very cute. But sort of buried in there, is in Theravada Buddhism, in the Southern School of Buddhism, they say the Buddha's first teaching of the practice, the meditation practice of loving kindness, was using it as an antidote to fear. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole legend around that where the Buddha sent off this group of monks to meditate in a forest, and the forest happened to be haunted by tree spirits who were not happy with the presence of the monks, and so they made ghoulish sounds and horrible apparitions and drove them away in fear. And this group of people went running back to the Buddha and said, please send us to a different forest. And he said, I'm going to send you to the same forest, but I'm going to give you the only protection you're going to need, which was the first teaching of loving kindness. And he said, don't just recite it in a kind of, hollow way, practice it.
Yeah.
So they went back and practiced it. And as these stories all end so happily, the monks were so charmed by the beautiful energy coming their way, and they decided to feed the monks, and the tree spirits were so happy about the energy coming their way from the monks. They decided to feed the monks and take care of them and pamper them. So it all worked out well. So sometimes when people ask me in a very different note whether or not you believe in tree spirits, you take that point about fear and the antidote to fear.
Yes.
People ask me all the time, and it's a really important question, some variation on why should I have or practice loving kindness or compassion for people who hate me, people who hate people like me. They don't think I should exist. Mm-hmm. Why should I do that? And I think to myself, that makes a lot of sense. It, of course, means that exploration. What do I mean by love? And is it about freeing myself and not being so burdened or so obsessed and so determined by the actions of another? And or does it mean giving in? Things like that. And I ask myself, is this a situation where I or we would benefit from my being less afraid? Mm-hmm. And the answer is always yes. Mm-hmm. And so that implies, maybe the presence of some more love here would be of benefit.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I want to go back to Bob. In terms of, I found something that really connects back with what you were talking about a little bit ago, from the book, the new prelude that you did, preface. I have stopped focusing on myself and have focused on another, even an enemy, imagining them as happy, which also means at least mentally free from their fear and hatred of me. Once I have chosen happiness over fear and hatred, my intuition finds happiness in a lot of other things. The courage to be open to them combines with love, overcoming hate. I mean, that kind of says a lot right in there. And you know what I think, Bob and Sharon? I think that I look at myself and reacting to some of the horror that we see every day, especially around in the polarization in this country and so on. And I look at deep down at my motivations for it's enjoying the anger, if I could loving one's enemies, if I could just stop throwing epithets at the TV, okay? If I could just start there, I'd be in good shape. But I see how in the human condition, how easy it is to kind of wallow and enjoy in the hitting back, in the anger at another, in the separation and so on. How do we... that's
the thing. That's why I don't like translating. I used to do it, and most everybody is stuck on that nowadays. They translate klesha, which is the term, or kilesa in Pali, is the term in Buddhism for a mental state like hatred, lust, and so forth, that harms you. And they translate it, I used to translate it as affliction. But actually, it would not be hard to get rid of an affliction because it's already a pain. But actually, what kleshas are the cause of the affliction. And I think the best translation is an addiction. Because the addictions are dangerous because they seem to give a superficial pleasure.
Yeah.
They give like hatred particularly, seems to give someone who feels frightened and in a weak position, seems to give them the illusion of being stronger in the position by being enraged, and the anger gives the adrenaline rush, and then they get furious, and it makes them feel strong. But then actually they act completely idiotically usually, and self-destructively ultimately, and also it wears them out in a second and ruins their health. So it's actually like an addiction. It pretends to make you better, but actually ruins you. And so Buddha was very good about that these negative emotions based on our misunderstanding of our true nature and our relationship with others, the misunderstanding of our oneness with others at some level, making us feel we have to get them away from our universe and destroy them, which is the angry reaction, the vengeance reaction. And he completely understood that's totally self-destructive. When you do that, you're destroying yourself, not the enemy. The enemy will always come back. But you've internalized your enemy, actually, when you act hatefully, even towards someone who's attacking you. But on the other hand, one other important thing I think that Sharon rightly touched on, I think people feel that love means you're supposed to smile when the guy's about to run over you with a tank. But that isn't it. You can love the guy in the tank and jump out of the way.
Yeah.
Wish he didn't drive the tank, and even wish someone else would take the tank away from him or whatever, even if you can't. And so love, there is such a thing as tough love, we call it, or fierce compassion, which means that love gives you more power, actually, and more judicious use of the power. Loving kindness does than hatred does. Hatred seems to give you more power, but actually it makes you run bullheadedly against the tank and break your head on it. And that's not what is meant. But that is our wrong idea we have in the West. And I personally blame the Roman Empire for that idea. Personally, I do. I blame them for it, because the early Christians who had the love idea very nicely from a nice rabbi who were Jewish, many of them, some of them Greek, they were for they did not worship a crucified Christ. They worshipped a forceful Christ who kicked money changers out of the temple, who healed on the Sabbath, who did unconventional things in a loving way. And then the Romans, when they made it their orthodoxy from Constantine in the 4th century, they dug up a crucifix and they stuck that in everybody's face. And that's what that makes it looks like, that the loving guy got wasted. There's a Tibetan joke about a kid who was really naughty, who was a Buddhist kid, and his mom couldn't deal with him. And then a friend said, "Oh, take him to the nuns' school; they'll straighten him out. And they're really good teachers." And he's hopeless. Obviously, the guy was really, really wicked and naughty. So she took him over there, and then left him there. The Mother Superior said, fine, we'll take care of him. And then she comes back a few days later worrying about what happened to the kid. He says, did he tear down the nunnery or the school? Is he fine? She said, no, he's fine. He's studying in the next room. He completely calmed down. She said, really? And she went in and asked if she saw him there, and he was reading his ABC. So she said, well, what happened to you? What did they do to you? And he said, well, they didn't do anything to me. He said, it's just what they did to the other guy over there. And that made me behave. So I'm saying it was the Romans rubbed into people the idea. They didn't push the resurrected Jesus, the power of the loving guy who couldn't be killed. They showed him in his worst agony all the time. And that made a subliminal message to the West that the good guys are weak. And if you love, you're going to be trampled. Yeah. And if you're compassionate. Yeah. And it was really an unfortunate thing, which I blame them for, in addition to their modern annoyances. Although I do love Francis. I adore the guy. I really do. Because he talked lovingly about the climate criminals who are wrecking who are responsible and should pay for Lahaina. And they're pumping more of it. And they're doing it exponentially, not just a little bit. We have to love them out of that, somehow.
I remember, Sharon, you saying it, it was actually when Ram Dass first started talking about loving awareness, and you in a talk were confronting the idea that you said people think love is weak.
Right.
That's exactly what you said back then. And it reminded me, when we were with Neem Karoli Baba, who said love is more powerful than electricity. And I was reminded of that.
Well, but actually, Buddha said love is more powerful than a nuclear explosion. Actually, they do say that. It's on a little more esoteric, secret side. They say that's the power of the universe. Nirvana is the reality of the universe, according to Buddha, even Four Noble Truths.
Right.
The other three, suffering, cause, and the path out of it, are in the relative illusory world, which doesn't mean they don't exist. But they're less real than Nirvana. That was his good news. And so that means the universe loves us, actually, whether alive or dead or in the between. And therefore, love is, and that relates to your unconditionality, Raghu. Love is aligning ourselves with the actual reality of the universe.
Yeah.
All this illusory separateness and, I got to get him out of my way before I can be happy and blah, blah, all that sort of stuff. That is illusory and is less real than, our solution is loving each other.
Yeah. There's something that I hit upon in the book. I was going through it around patience because, I pick up on things that I find I have gone through the most difficult times with. Patience is one of them. And Sharon, talk about insightful patience.
Yeah.
I had never heard that term before. I don't know which one of you was talking about it, but if you could speak to it, just patience and what that means relative to the central premise here of loving those who maybe we feel are unlovable.
Well, looking back at, different writings I've done or ways I teach, I realize that one of the things I seem to enjoy a lot is redeeming words.
Yeah.
I wrote a book called Faith, and people, friends were saying, not the name Crowley Baba's decisions, but other friends were saying to me, why are you writing a book on that? Which was interesting, or even loving kindness or love, and you can do that with so many words because over time and the ways we've used them, the ways we hear them, silence has come to mean being silenced for many people. That's their real experience. And so is faith. It's come to mean being silenced for many people. So patience is interesting because it can seem a little dreary. As a term, we think about be patient. It means don't have needs, don't be yourself, don't try to make anything happen. You're just going to endure, hating it all the while. And of course, that's not what it means in this context. But I'm thinking, both of you have children. I've never had a child, although I'm close to people who were once children and now adults. And So I've seen some of that process, and also a little bit through the eyes of their parents. And things don't happen right away. Lessons aren't learned immediately. Things take time sometimes. Or you've got some big project, and it doesn't go precisely the way you wanted it to go. And sometimes it's a long time later you find out, somebody took the seed of that idea and they went into this other thing, and then they thank me. I never had anything to do with it, really, but they say they wouldn't have done it except for that seed being planted. Or we live in such an intricate, interconnected world, and to be able to be full on present with whatever is, and not to be demanding, of a kind of accelerated course of results, and to understand that things will ripple out, and we do the best we can. If we're looking for the source of our integrity, it may not be in the immediate results of something. It can be infuriating, of course. People don't always behave. They seldom behave in exactly the way we would like them to behave. We call it patience, we call it equanimity. It's some ability to have kind of grace with letting go of attachment to immediate results. And going back also, Raghu, to something you said earlier, like I was thinking just before you said Neem Karoli Baba, when we were talking about the power of love and not being weak, I thought, like, anyone that I know that has met Neem Karoli Baba talks about it as the loving opening for them, or reinforcement of such a powerful, different sense of love. And nobody seems to refer back to that time as like, it was kind of a waste. I should have been doing a startup, or, that didn't help me later, even now. And just then you said Neem Karoli Baba, and I said, there it is.
Yeah.
He's referring back to an encounter that happened a long time ago in chronological time.
Yeah. When it's so ever present.
How KD told me that Neem Karoli Baba Maharaji would always cry when he talked about Jesus.
Yeah.
He would really flip out when he talked about it.
Yeah.
And that he gave his all, and this kind of thing. I really love that, the way I met him, that, KD saying that. They're very marvelous.
Yeah.
Ecumenical.
So here's something else that, again, it's on, we talked about patience, and actually, as you were talking, Sharon, I was thinking one of the ingredients that would support the concept of being a little bit more patient around so much that goes on in our lives is spaciousness, and getting a little bit of cutting down on the reactivity and the spaciousness, which, you being the meditation teacher, and Bob, we have to really attend to it. And we say this a lot on these podcasts, the practice. We say all these things, but there's a way in which there is a necessity, and we can't do a should have to anybody, but we do, that kind of practice creates spaciousness, which allows for less reactive stuff. And around patience, and here's the other one, I don't know, I'll just read it. Now that you know that your enemy is merely the tool of his own anger being something most of us deal with, you can be angry only with the mental addiction that drives him. That's a great line. You can be angry with his anger, with anger itself. Your anger at anger effectively becomes the energy of tolerance. You guys wrote that. That's a great paragraph.
It's good. Now coming back to the word is kshanti. And Pali, I think it's probably the same kshanti, but they don't like consonant clusters in Pali, I know, but I think kshanti is still the same. I forget exactly. And what that is, notice, that's the word shanti for peace, with a K in front of it. So, which is a sharp sound, K. Kshanti. K is associated with something sharp and violent, but then Shanti absorbs it. So I never can decide in English if tolerance or patience is a better translation. And because there's, patience has one negative side when we use that, although it is the word that they use for the virtue, the English Anglo moralists like Chaucer, even back there, they use the word patience for the virtue of non-anger. But they don't use tolerance in that context. But I think modern patience, people kind of think, well, I'll get back at my enemy later. I'll nourish a really hostile feeling toward him, but I won't do anything right now, and I'll get him later. So patience of sort of waiting for your opportunity. But on the other hand, patience of being able to accept an injury without absolutely flipping out, I think is still maybe the main one in morality. But tolerance is connected to it. But what I wanted to share is, in the wisdom phenomenology, the thing in both Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism of coming to know your own openness by getting rid of the kind of rigid self-reactions and reactivities, which is the main thrust of Buddhist therapy, you could say. And in that, there is a penultimate state before a sort of enlightened realization of something where you tolerate the impossibility of even like being angry with anger. It's kind of an impossible idea. Is that you can't be angry at all. It would seem. But yet, if the forcefulness, the seeming forcefulness of anger, pitting it against itself, is something you could only develop tolerance for. And then the tolerance morphs into full understanding. So the way that coming from being commonsensical and reasonable about reactivity and not having to react impulsively only from pure, unenlightened instinct, a gut instinct, which is unenlightened. There could be a gut instinct of enlightenment, but the way it gets there is you get a tolerance of the inability to grasp the enormity of what reality is, and then that holds you in a place where you can then actually live it and become what you want to be, and actually laugh when someone's bothering you in a way, sort of really, it's a kind of creative dissociativeness that is a very which you could use to connect to others in an open way, and it's used that way. The Buddhist psychology is both Abhidhamma or Abhidharma, Theravada, Mahayana. It's so sophisticated in dealing with it. They never ask you to come back from anger to compassion without going to non-anger first, or anger with anger. And so tolerance or patience is the middle road before compassion. And all the Tibetan things on cultivating compassion always feel that the patience is the first foundation from which compassion can spring. That it's unrealistic to move to compassion and love from anger without first developing that kind of tolerance and patience. Very good. They describe it really beautifully. And what I love about it is, it underlines, because the neuroscientists, Sharon, our pals, all the neuroscientists are all discovering all these things. They never want to quite acknowledge that all these positive emotions, in a way, come from the wisdoms being critical of the negative ones. So that the root of the love and the compassion actually is being realistic by knowing what your real nature is and not what your habitual, instinctual reactivity is. And they never want to acknowledge that quite, that the source of compassion is wisdom, because then that shows that the Western science maybe doesn't really have wisdom as a goal. It just wants information.
Right.
Thinks of wisdom as a mystical thing or something like that, rather than something you can systematically achieve. Isn't that fun? And by the way, you look so incredibly patient, Raghu. I can't believe you've been suffering so much. Both of you look so cheery today. I think it must be Ram Dass's influence.
Yes.
When I talk to him, I always think of, where is Ram Dass now? And what is he doing? And I know that, maybe he thought he would be with the one, and that once he was with the one, he always used to say he wanted to be with the one. He wanted to get rid of the movie of the life. But now, being with the one, I think he realizes the one likes to be something like a movie director. And all his the followers and disciples and Maharaja's followers and disciples, or maybe he wants to kind of give a little directorial advice to them how to improve the quality of remaining, and for him coming back, maybe.
Yeah,
this incarnation.
I got to tell you, I got an anecdote, okay?
I could feel him in your presence and in Sharon's too, and in my good moments in my own, I do.
Yeah, let me tell you that after he left and we were in Maui, we were doing, ceremonies and so on and having gatherings, and I went over to his house, and this is, just what was in early February, so 6 weeks or 5 weeks after he left. And I went into his room and sat and meditated, and I never, ever really see anything. I have no psychic thing, nothing, for the most part, right? I'm sitting there meditating, and then suddenly, he comes into my space, and he's standing, and I see him standing next to Maharaji, Nimkoro.
On his legs, no legs.
Yeah, and I thought, well, you didn't go anywhere. And I was like a little bit surprised, but I had completely that experience that you just described. So it was really far out, really beautiful.
That's so beautiful. And in some ways, it's like, it's also tied into what we were talking about. It's like sometimes when we look at anger, for example, which some schools would have you do long before you looked at love,
Yeah.
Because it's for many people the more immediate experience. Like you see you could say benefit of it, which is the energy of it, that you're not passive, you're not complacent. You also see the tremendous problem with being lost in it, not like feeling it, just feeling it come and go, or feeling it even intensely, but buying into it, like falling into it and inhabiting it, more thoroughly and being defined by it, which is even worse because then you act. You say something or you do something. So you look at that and you think, oh, how limited was that? Life can be so big. Our sense of life can be so much bigger. And here we are caught in this tiny little repetitive loop. He said that, and he said that, and he said that, and he said that. I have a friend who describes himself, I think, quite accurately as a kind of an obsessive type, and he will hold a grudge and go over it and over it and over it and over it and over. For someone's fault, so go over that list again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
He emerged from a period like that, and he said, I think it's actually an AA phrase, he said, I let him live rent-free in my brain for too long.
And
you think about how we can spend a day. We can spend a day like that very easily.
Yeah.
Or maybe in a more expansive mode that's open to like the miracle of life, that is very different. And so it's out of compassion for ourselves in a way that we think, okay, what would it be not to just have this habitual relationship to anger? Like it's the only source of strength. Can I actually explore the domains of love and compassion as a source of strength? And then we're inspired to do that, to make that exploration.
Yeah, absolutely. So great. I want to bring something else up that I noted, and it certainly is in reference to, again, what's gone on in Maui, the tremendous suffering and now grief. And this is about grief. It is possible to metabolize grief in ways that don't produce hostility, but that nourish our lives, our families, and our communities, and offer lessons for moral and spiritual growth. We see that freedom depends on our ability to open to a bigger context. You just talked about that. In the midst of pain, we look toward what is whole and undamaged. It's not that everything becomes all right, but everything is recognized as part of the immense story of life, of nature, of truth. It's certainly not that everything becomes pleasant or inconsequential, but we are no longer defined by trauma, because now we have a more powerful sense of wholeness and connection.
That is really
you guys did great.
Aaron must have written that. That must be Chris, Sharon. That's really
I think
good.
I did write that.
It's phenomenal.
That's great.
And so apropos, right?
Beautiful. Absolutely right. His Holiness always says that. He always says that when he's really sad about something, getting news from Tibet, they just tortured another 100 people, blah, blah, so they send him these messages to keep him under, they have the whole nation of 6 million people hostage, then to him, because they don't want him to embarrass them, the Chinese communists, So he says when he gets really bad, he says it's always compassion that saves him from depression, because what happens is he gets to where he observes himself being so miserable from this terrible news that is sent to him, is transmitted to him. But then he starts thinking, when he notices his terrible, sad feeling, he thinks about other people who all the bad news that they have. He broadens the field of it, because he realizes, oh God, I feel so bad because I hear this. But then think of all these people over there in Somalia and wherever in history, the Holocaust this and Holocaust that. And then suddenly, the more he expands his empathy with other people who suffer similar to what he's sad about the people suffering, then his own suffering it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller in this sort of ocean of it. So in a way, it's very counterintuitive. You'd think when you're freaked out about some terrible suffering, if you think about more suffering, you just get worse. But actually, by expanding the vision of it, it makes your own smaller. And then all as a whole, it forces you kind of to find some seed of joy and happiness within yourself to try to do something for any of those beings, So then that's where the confidence that there is some seed even in you when you're this depressed seems to come from to him by this widening of the thing. Right. But I have to confess, of course, I read what you wrote when we were working together. I just didn't realize how absolutely great what Raghu just read is. I do have that experience a lot in writing things, that even things I wrote and before I thought, oh, that was okay, but okay, I can't go on the next page. So I'm trying to get it written. And then actually I like it later. And I realized I didn't quite know what I was saying at the time. I didn't realize it was so good, because maybe I was channeling something I had bumped into from somebody else. So that's really wonderful, Sharon.
That's
widening of the scope. Yeah. And this relates to something that I'm very focused on right now. In my own Wisdom is Bliss book, I realized I'm rereading it on a podcast series now.
Oh, yeah.
I realized that it's this funny thing. People think, well, compassion is when you let yourself go empathetically into being very depressed about other people's suffering so that you can't bear it and you really do it. But it's always that's where it starts. Of course, everyone says it isn't just that, but it starts there. And then I realized, no, it can't be, because why would you have love, which has to be is the measure before compassion in the immeasurables, right, Sharon? In the fourth, first there's love and then there's compassion. So you have to have love first, which is the wish for the suffering being or any being to be happy. And wait, in order to have a wish for someone else to be happy, you have to have an idea what is happiness. Yeah. So you have to find some kind of happiness in yourself. So you have to you have to wish for happiness for yourself first, and then you have to a little bit realize it. Oh, that's when I'm happy, or that's when I was happy. That little thing in the middle of my misery about grandma or this one or that one or the other one, but I had a little bit of like something happy, and then that's the seed of it. And then, they seem not to have any little seed. I want them to have that. So first step is to find even that happiness is possible, that it's a real thing in yourself. Yeah. And then you could wish for another person to have it sincerely. Otherwise, if you define yourself as one total bag of misery, how would you realistically want someone else to be happy? What would it mean? It wouldn't even mean anything. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So that first, but we never want to say that because we feel that would be counter to the piety of, being compassionate is really opening yourself up to misery. But actually, you have to be open to the fact that every sensitive being has some kind of health energy, vital energy, life energy, which is the happiness energy. Don't you think? What do you think?
I do. I think it's totally beautiful, and it's lovely to think of these words again in a different way. Because most of the time, if I hear someone else describing compassion, they say "suffer with."
Yes.
Which is the I guess Webster dictionary definition of compassion, and it's hard to imagine the association of compassion and joy, but here it is. And Raghu, do you notice how many times Bob uses the word realistic?
Yeah, it fits with the real.
The word real is one of Raghu's favorite words.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a real third noble truth nowadays.
I'm gonna. So we're kind of. Our time is almost up, but I can't.
Oh my goodness!
I know we could listen. We could go on.
Alan Watts said so, or Ramdas, or Maharaji said so. I know it. I'm just kidding.
Okay, Bob, you included. I think it's. Well, I'm pretty sure it's you. It's a, I guess, a poem. I'm not quite sure what you would call it, by Dharmarakshita. How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, Dharmarakshita, that's right.
Dharmarakshita. I just want to read this. This will be our...
Okay.
And it's so
great
incredible.
Master in the 11th century, yes.
Yeah. In spite of my ideals, I'm stingier than a dog with his bone. Although I might be bright, other preoccupation, base of all virtue, still gets blown away by winds of self-preoccupying thoughts. So death exterminating wisdom, which, Bob, you do explain is that's the real, healthy, real person, please smash my lethal ego thinker's head. Terminate my secret enemy, my selfish heart. I just love that. Because I'm supposed to be...
Is that quoted in the book? Is that quoted?
Yeah. I'm reading. There's the book. I'm reading.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Because I'm supposed to be holy and pure, I'm not supposed to really love this or detest that. So I hide my loves and hates deep within. I see only others as greedy or hating. Then I scold them unfairly and project my faults on them. I haven't diffused my own self-addiction. So how can I complain about their faults? So death exterminating wisdom, please smash my lethal ego thinker's head. Terminate my secret enemy, my selfish heart. That kind of says it all.
That was a really great work, that one, Dharmarakshita.
Oh, that's so
great.
A
teacher of Atisha went to Tibet in 1042. But then he had run away to Tibet himself during some sort of invasion where his monastery was burned in Western India. And he somehow got up over the pass into Ladakh or Tibet. But he didn't speak Tibetan, and he was invited by somebody who gave him a translator. So he just worked as a yak herder. And then he wrote that book and sent it back to India or something. And then Atisha lamented that no one had taken advantage of him in Tibet except through that book, Dharmarakshita. Wonderful. That's an amazing book. I didn't realize I quoted that. It's considered very advanced in the Tibetan thing, because of the sort of fierce language of, shatter my egotistical thinker, self-centered thinker's head.
That's so great.
It's really.
Oh God! Thank you guys for getting this out there again. Love your enemies.
Look,
right?
It's so sweet to meet you both.
Yeah,
sure.
To hang out.
We should do it again just to hang out.
You look incredibly turkey. You must have had a hell of a good birthday party. Happy birthday, Sharon, really.
And happy birthday to you
more. Thank you.
Many
I almost have the same birthday. But we said Obama in between us.
Bob is August 3rd, Barack Obama is August 4th, and I'm August 5th.
Oh, my God.
There goes good. August.
Great. Yeah, that's it. Thank you both for being here and hanging out with me. And it's so profoundly enjoyable. I can't even tell you. And we'll have to figure out how to do some more in person as stuff as time goes on. Yeah.
Lots of love.
Yeah,
Yes.
everybody, by the way, it'll all be connected up in the show notes so you can get the book. Is phenomenal, as you've heard some of the pieces that we've been talking about in it.
Wonderful.
And then Bob's work and Sharon's work, we'll connect you up that way as well. And we'll be back next
Thank
week.
you. Go in peace.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
In peace.
Thank you.
Aleshu, Alepe.